The story begins with a girl standing at the window, looking out for her husband. Soon, she returned to her chambers and began to comb her hair. And still her gaze was empty. After leaving her room, the girl walked down the corridor. The maids watched her go. The girls discussed the blonde with ridicule, saying that she was going to her husband again so that he would drive her away. The blonde's name was Celestia Royce. She was the only daughter of Duke Royce. A month ago, Celestia got married, which resulted in her becoming the wife of a guy named Roosevelt. Entering the room, the girl undressed and reached out to the guy, who was sleeping at the time. But before he could reach him, he woke up abruptly and grabbed Celestia's hand, stopping her. After which, the door slammed shut and Celestia was thrown out of the room with shouts for her to leave. The guy left the room and continued screaming. He repeated more than once that he had no desire to touch Celestia. Celestia didn't say anything and started to walk away while the guy angrily followed her with his gaze. The maids continued to laugh, saying that the mistress would never get tired of trying, and that her act was shameless, because every day it was the same. At 24, Cecilia married for the 5th time. Among the aristocracy, she acquired the shameful nickname of the sterile puppet. The doctor said the girl was fine. But the real problem wasn't in Cecilia's body. The maids wondered if Cecilia was familiar with the feeling of shame, since she was the daughter of the Duke himself. The heroine could only bite her lips in anger. If it helped her conceive a child, Cecilia would be ashamed as much as she wanted. The girl had only to return to her room, and while the night was shining outside, she cried. Her earliest memory was of being 7 years old, when the Duke told Cecilia that she must become a woman worthy of the name of House Royce. This became the meaning of her life, and when the time came for her first wedding, Cecilia agreed to anyone who would be a worthy match for the House of Royce and who could love someone like her. Her first husband told her that Cecilia was incapable of satisfying him. Her days of pain, which she endured without daring to utter a sound, came to an abrupt end. During her second marriage, the heroine also agreed to anyone, as long as he was equal to the House of Royce. Her second husband demanded a divorce. Not only was Cecilia unable to conceive an heir, but she also boasted of being smarter than her own husband. Cecilia only wanted to be useful to her husband by offering her ideas, but he simply turned his back on her. For the 3rd time, the girl settled for someone she liked, having already been abandoned by her husbands twice. But the 3rd time nothing worked out. Cecilia was covered with sadness and already agreed to any husband. The Duke hit his daughter in the face and shouted at her that in 24 years she still had not been able to conceive a single child. The Duke added that his daughter had certain unusual tendencies and a strong temperament. In ordinary company, she would not even raise an eyebrow. Such rumors filled not only the upper classes, but also the lower classes. Cecilia was, "It hurts," but apathy absorbed her. The Duke was about to leave the room. Before leaving, he declared that this time she was obliged to give birth to at least one child. Just give birth to a child as the father wants, and live with this child in peace. This the only thing wished Cecilia. Following her father's orders, Cecilia stopped looking for love. The main thing was not to fail in having a child. Of all the candidates the Duke had prepared, Cecilia only took a liking to one young man. Although this guy was invited as a candidate, he showed no interest in the Duke's daughter. If he had no illusions or false hopes, Cecilia hoped that at least he would not abandon her. After years of humiliation and pain, Cecilia gradually stopped feeling anything, so she decided to choose a new candidate who was different. The guy couldn't believe what he heard, and in shock, he dropped his wine on the table. Splashed with wine, Cecilia immediately reached for a napkin, asking the guy to become her husband. The guy got down on one knee and revealed that he happily accepted Cecilia's proposal. But it was precisely this choice that brought her the most unbearable suffering, something Cecilia did not even suspect then. The subject left the chosen husband and Cecilia in one room and asked them to wait until the end of the ball. Cecilia bowed her head and thanked Count Roosevelt for agreeing to this marriage. Roosevelt Tristan is a former mercenary who gained fame for his exploits in the Great War with the southern continent. For his invaluable services, the king granted him the title of Count and his own lands. Today, he commands a powerful mercenary force that wages wars across the country, accepting orders from lords for exorbitant rewards. Roosevelt said that they were alone now, so there was no need for these formal addresses. He asked Cecilia to call him more simply. A week later, the priest handed over the marriage contract And from then on, Roosevelt and Cecilia became wife and husband. For the fifth time, the heroine did without a lavish wedding ceremony. This was her fifth marriage, and Mr. Roosevelt didn't want a celebration. Ever since they got married, Roosevelt remained as cold as he had been when they met. Cecilia didn't understand why this was so, because then he agreed so willingly. But now he was cold towards her. The fact that Cecilia is indifferent to him is even for the best, but she asked God that the girl could conceive at least today. Later in the evening, Mr. Roosevelt was in his chambers, cleaning his trusty blade. Cecilia entered his room and apologized for dropping in unannounced. She waited for Roosevelt in the bedroom for a long time, but he never came. Cecilia wanted to know if Roosevelt had taken a bath. The guy asked her to leave, saying that the room was not for the two of them, but only for her. The girl didn't understand why her room was better than the owner's room in that case. Besides, same today their first marriage night. Roosevelt said that he liked his room quite well. The gentleman didn't care about the wedding night. He, not was no the slightest desires touch Cecilia. The heroine couldn't allow this, because it was their wedding night. She begged Roosevelt to do it at least just today. Roosevelt told her to shut up. Cecilia knew nothing about him, yet she dared to make such a fuss. The guy continued, saying that the Duke's daughter probably had her fill of her ex-husbands. Cecilia tried to stop Roosevelt, but the gentleman waved her off and told her not to touch him. Roosevelt asked Cecilia to leave. She could do whatever he wanted on this estate, but he would never sleep in the same bed with Cecilia. The Count had to hide his true feelings when Cecilia was not around. He clenched his teeth. The heroine returned to her chambers and fell asleep on the bed. Opening her eyes, there was only indifference on the girl's face. As a result, during this entire month, Mr. Roosevelt never allowed Cecilia to even undress in bed with him. At first, the heroine spent many hours every evening preparing for his arrival. She took baths with fragrant oils and carefully put herself in order. But despite all efforts, Count Roosevelt simply showed the girl the door each time. She's been dumped 4 times already, but this is the first time Cecilia has been rejected from the start. But when the Count agreed to this marriage, Cecilia's heart fluttered with hope. If Roosevelt started taking on mercenary jobs again, he wouldn't just sleep in another room, he'd stop coming home altogether. The maids were surprised that Cecilia was locked up today, although she is so active at night. Almost all the servants in this estate are inexperienced. They don't hesitate to badmouth their mistress behind her back. Even in her room, they cleaned up in a slipshod manner. Seeing Mr. Roosevelt's attitude towards his mistress, they decided that she could be ignored. Often happens with an uneducated person's servants. Apparently, since the Count had only recently received his title, the staff of servants was hastily recruited from anyone who could find them. Therefore, when Roosevelt returns, Cecilia should ask him to at least hire a competent manager to train the staff. Cecilia overheard the maids nearby talking. One of them was already 6 months pregnant and expecting a child, but her beloved had died in an accident, so the woman was determined to protect this child at all costs. She was incredibly grateful to have been hired despite her lack of experience. Cecilia simply tolerated these conversations. She envied everyone who managed to conceive. After all, her duty, how daughters ducal kind, continue their line. But above all, the heroine simply wanted to devote herself entirely to the child and live in peace. But Roosevelt did not share such desires. She had never been told anything like that. Cecilia didn't crave carnal pleasures at all. It was simply the only way to conceive a child. If it weren't for this, who would willingly agree to such a painful, torturous, and shameful act? And yet, all of Cecilia's previous experiences in bed were terrible. Each of her husbands was disappointed. The main character was beating herself on the bed in anger. The girl had no idea what to do in this situation. Clutching the bed, Cecilia began to sob again. In her head, the girl begged for someone's help. The subject entered the room and informed Mrs. Cecilia that the girl had received a parcel from the Royce house. The parcel turned out to be the information about Mr. Roosevelt that the main character had ordered. Since they decided to skip the ceremony, the marriage was consummated immediately. It turns out that he attended the ball where the groom was chosen on the personal recommendation of Prince Louis. So, the rumors about their close friendship is pure truth. Roosevelt's record of service was simply astounding. He first gained fame as a soldier 6 years earlier. While reading the information, the main character found something surprising. Count Roosevelt was from the village of Ephesus. According to Cecilia's memory, 14 years ago, a purge of the remnants of the Revolutionary Army took place there. This village was no longer on the map, and Cecilia's father commanded a punitive detachment. Count Roosevelt's home was destroyed due to the fault of the main character's father, so it was clear why the Count treated her so coldly. He was invited by the will of the royal family, and he simply could not refuse when Cecilia chose him. Cecilia began to cry. The irony of it all brought her to her senses. To choose as her husband a man who hated her with all his heart. The Count wanted to know from his subject whether Cecilia had really spent the whole day locked in her room. For the entire month, the main character barely leaves the house during the day. It's as if she's deliberately hiding from him, continuing this seclusion. Roosevelt realized he had wasted his time on her. Tomorrow, the Count was leaving for war again. Finally, he will be able to return to your own real case. Cecilia left the room and approached the Count, asking him to give her a little time. The main character handed the Count part of the investigation that she had ordered before their wedding. Roosevelt said that these aristocrats were always sticking their noses in where they weren't wanted, and that really irritated him. Cecilia interrupted the Count. She said that the investigation involved his home village of Ephesus. Upon learning this, the main character sighed and said that she understood why Roosevelt hated her. The Count confirmed these words. Now it was clear to Cecilia that he simply could not refuse an offer that was backed by the royal family's recommendation. With a sad expression on her face, Cecilia revealed that Roosevelt had never wanted the marriage, so she suggested a divorce. Showing another paper, the girl said that she had already prepared all the necessary papers. Cecilia had already filled in all the required fields, and the Count only had to sign them. Cecilia asked Roosevelt to trust her, as the girl had a lot of experience in such matters. The girl agreed to any terms of divorce. The Count interrupted her and slammed the table. He asked her why Cecilia thought the Count would give her this damn divorce, and with each in a word, anger filled his murmur. Enraged, Count Roosevelt told the girl never to see those papers in his house again. Having calmed down a bit, the guy said that if she had any complaints, the Count was ready to listen to them. Roosevelt assumed Cecilia confirmed that she was worried about the wedding night issue, but the girl didn't understand the Count's reaction. Her offer of divorce was supposed to be a unique chance for him to achieve freedom. Roosevelt couldn't believe that Cecilia was asking for a divorce simply because he refused to share her bed. This proved that the Duke's daughter was truly as obsessed with this as rumors suggested. The Count grabbed his head and asked the girl if she had no other interests besides nighttime pleasures. The main character stood up and started to leave, saying that the Count could do whatever he wanted with the papers. Her offer still stands, so the main character is ready to accept a divorce at any time. Roosevelt was soon expected to be called upon to fight again. During this time, Cecilia would likely find other distractions. Therefore, the Count tore up the divorce papers without hesitation, hoping that Cecilia would come to her senses. Balls, tea parties, music, embroidery, wine, dresses, and jewelry. There are plenty of things that aristocrats love to indulge in, and for this Count need to continue earn on war. The servants have become completely lazy. They don't even come into the room to clean anymore. Since he left, they keep sending luxurious things here. But what, by opinion, Countess, Cecilia, I have to deal with this what? No matter how much the girl thought about it, she couldn't understand. He hated her. Then why was he so categorically against a divorce? If this is revenge for the destroyed village, then perhaps the neglect of the servants is also part of this revenge. Without divorce, she will be able to again go out get married. Time was running out. Cecilia was getting older. If this was his way of getting revenge on her, then he'd achieved his goal. Count Roosevelt's subjects praised him, for as usual, they had achieved a crushing victory. When the warrior heard about his marriage, he thought that the Count would become softer. But his incomparable power nowhere. Not happened. Roosevelt has become even more ruthless, and at the same time, he looks so irritated. The warrior approached the Count and asked for the honor of taking on the completion of all unfinished business. The subject wanted to help Roosevelt so that he would return to his wife sooner. The Count was overcome with anger whenever he saw this woman. He couldn't bear to even be in the same space with her. Soon the estate became quite noisy, so Celestia assumed that the Count had returned. She was right, Roosevelt was at the estate, so the girl went down to greet her husband. The Count wanted to know what the girl wanted. Celestia asked him to ignore her. She was just waiting for dinner to end so she could talk. Roosevelt said that when people looked at him like that, he couldn't swallow a single morsel, so he wanted to know now. Celestia wanted something confirmed. Celestia told him that Roosevelt didn't care what she was doing. The Earl planned to never touch her, and at the same time, he refused to sign the divorce papers. Whether she had made a mistake in something, the gentleman confirmed these words. Celestia thanked him for the answer, and then began to leave. Before the main character left the room, she said that she no longer needed a child from the Count. Celestia's father sent her a letter. He wanted them to visit the estate with the Count. The Duke invited his daughter to a masquerade, where he met a woman, Celestia. Saying it was worth it their visit. The Duke wanted Celestia not to disappoint her husband and to learn at least one way to please a man. Therefore, the main character decided to follow her father's orders and went there by carriage. The Count was in his room and pondered Celestia's words. He did not understand what all these questions were about. Suddenly, Roosevelt opened the door with force and shouted his wife's name. He clearly understood that she wanted to try to conceive a child again, but not with him. The Count wanted to know where Celestia was. And as it turned out, she had recently left by carriage. Celestia got to the masquerade. She no longer wanted to rely on Roosevelt. She would have to conceive the child herself. This masquerade is a place for secret meetings. Here, people seek partners without knowing each other's faces, so they can part ways at dawn. The main character no longer has time to try to convince the man who hates her. Celestia doesn't care who the father is. It would be nice if he had hair and eyes like Lord Roosevelt's. The girl decided to put all thoughts aside and focus on the child. All equals no. No one who fell in love would true Celestia. Let it be just a painful and humiliating act. She doesn't care. Therefore, she asked, how can quicker to grant to her child? Suddenly, the act was interrupted between Celestia and the stranger. Some noise from the main hall distracted them. Mr. Roosevelt made all this noise. He kicked the door and got straight to the main character. The security guard at the entrance tried to stop the gentleman. This is an officially recognized establishment with a history. Such behavior is unacceptable. The stranger was terrified as soon as he realized that in front of him stood that same mad war count, Roosevelt. Roosevelt leaned over to the guy and grabbed him by the shirt, asking where he had touched his wife. Celestia didn't understand why he was here, since the Count himself said that he didn't care what she did. Earl Roosevelt picked Celestia up and said they were going home. Everything seemed too strange. The gentleman himself said that he didn't even want to touch Celestia. On the way home, Roosevelt only asked his wife if she was injured, after which they continued driving. Throwing the girl on the bed, Roosevelt stood in front of her and asked what Celestia had done. The main character stated that she had checked in advance. It was a masquerade. If he hadn't shown up, no one would have known it was Celestia. Roosevelt took Celestia's hand and said that he did not intend to touch her, but he was not the kind of man who would watch silently as his woman was groped by another. The Count pressed the girl to the bed, biting her ear. He asked if this man whispered in Celestia's ear. Celestia didn't understand why he refused her even on their wedding night. Count asked for which shoulder. He hugged girl. The main character blushed and couldn't say anything. Roosevelt told her not to even think about going to another man ever again. Roosevelt asked if she really missed intimacy that much. So much so that Celestia didn't care whether it was a stranger or someone like the Count. Suddenly, the Count's expression changed. He was no longer angry, but on the contrary, he was sobbing. Roosevelt asked why Celestia became such woman. Celestia asked what all this meant. The gentleman stood up and decided to bring the girl some clothes. Leaving the room, the Count told the girl to return to her room as soon as she changed her clothes. Mr. Roosevelt's tears that Celestia saw today were like those of a small child. While on the training field, Roosevelt didn't understand why he even said those words to Celestia. The Count remembered his childhood. In front of him was a girl named Solace. He was crying, and she was trying to support him. After wiping away Roosevelt's tears, Solace extended her hand to him and invited him to go to the highest roof. Roosevelt admired Solace. He dreamed of becoming like Solace, whom he considered a boy. Solace knew about this and told Roosevelt that he would become the same and even more courageous. Roosevelt was an orphan, and when he learned that Solace had gone, he was also told about the Revolutionary Army that had been defeated. And that day in the morning, a carriage suddenly arrived in their village. The people who arrived in it turned out to be from the nobility. They were from the family of Duke Royce, who was on the side of the royal army. And no, that boy not Solace, but the Lady Celestia. Roosevelt couldn't believe it because Sels hated aristocrats. But he went with them. Soon Roosevelt had to flee. The royal army broke into the village, and chaos reigned. They were going to burn all village to erase any their traces. The boy became a vagabond when he was sitting in the alley. He saw the carriage of Duke Royce. Celestia, who was sitting inside the carriage, suddenly changed. Her gaze became empty. Roosevelt didn't care that Celestia was a girl. What was more important was how cold her eyes were. They were like ice. This wasn't the Celestia Roosevelt knew. It was probably because of her real father, who had taken the girl away by force and even burned down the village. As a child, Roosevelt promised himself that he would save Celestia no matter what. As a result, he joined the army and trained as hard as he could to become stronger and perform military feats and take Celestia back. Roosevelt persuaded the captain and finally got to the reception at the Royce house. Hoping to see Celestia, the Count noticed the Duke formally announcing the marriage of his daughter, Celestia. Roosevelt had heard rumors that Celestia had already been divorced 4 times. The reason with by everyone them was her dissatisfaction in bed. Soon Roosevelt began to realize that this was no longer the Solace of the past. In this case, she for sure, for a long time I forgot his. If only he hadn't been chosen, the Count might have been able to accept the fact that she wouldn't be his. Roosevelt had hoped, but the obstacles only multiplied. Moreover, this obsession with their wedding night proved the truth of those very rumors. Roosevelt couldn't allow this. He wouldn't let Celestia turn her back on him anymore. Even if the girl was nothing but an empty shell, the Count had no intention of letting her go. If there was no intimacy between them, he wouldn't get tired of her. Mr. Roosevelt kept in his safe the very handkerchief with which Solace used to wipe away his tears. Celestia sat opposite the doctor. The girl said that there were no problems with her physical health. The doctor added that, except for marks on the neck and shoulders, there were no signs of violence. The main character didn't understand a single thing. Why, when Roosevelt interrogated her, Celestia's body was burning so much. The doctor asked if the scar on the back of Celestia's head was old, and if it had been an accident. But this happened back in childhood. Celestia didn't want her husband to know about this scar. The doctor was more concerned about the girl's heart than her body. The doctor told Roosevelt about her symptoms, which bordered on depression. Physically, everything was fine, but Celestia apparently suffered from severe mental stress. According to Roosevelt, there was no reason why she was suffering. The woman advised that, for the sake of the future, Celestia should hire a personal physician. Also, Mr. Roosevelt needs to communicate more with his wife in everyday situations. The Count wondered if she was so ill that Celestia really didn't want him to disturb her at the masquerade. Roosevelt couldn't believe that Celestia had reached such a state because of some obsession with intimacy. Celestia had no need to drown in such debauchery because she was so beautiful. Roosevelt didn't want to do anything about it. As soon as he touched her, he lost control of himself. The Count couldn't stand it anymore. His sanity had simply burned out. If he touched her again, this time Roosevelt would drown in emotion. Roosevelt continued to train, realizing that he was no longer the orphan that Solace had once abandoned. He's not like her previous husbands. Unlike those worthless ones who could only keep Solace with fleeting amusements. Since Celestia has already become his wife, the Count will not allow her to spend her days wallowing in pleasures. Roosevelt wanted to earn as much money as he could and provide her with a life of luxury so that Celestia would never need another man again. This was Celestia Royce's atonement for betraying him and stealing his heart twice. The subject turned to Celestia and said that the Count had come to visit the girl. Celestia understood that it was for this very reason that the maids had suddenly taken up cleaning. Celestia was curious about what the doctor had said. After all, 17 years had passed since the scar appeared. As a child, the girl suffered from amnesia. She couldn't remember not only the incident with the carriage, but also her entire past, and even herself. This was not a big problem for the Duke. On the contrary, it was an excellent chance to start her life anew, as befits a member of the ducal family. For 8 years, until the end of the Revolution, the Duke's wife pretended to be the wife of his servant, and all this time they hid in the remote province. Only when a carriage was finally sent for her, they were attacked. resulting in the death of the lady. Young Lady Celestia was 7 years old at the time. Born in that village, in exile, Celestia was the only daughter of a ducal family, and to become a true lady worthy of House Royce, and to produce an heir worthy of House Royce, was her only goal. The Count returned to the residence late in the evening, so he quickly rushed to Celestia. Upon entering her room, Roosevelt was surprised to find the lady had fallen asleep in a sitting position. The Count was supposed to arrive at noon, but he kept her waiting through a sudden meeting with people from the nobility, and Celestia was unable to wait. There was some paper under Roosevelt's feet. Looking down, the Count was convinced that it was a letter. The letter was sent by Duke Royce, and the Count thought it was an important message, so he opened it. When the Count learned that the letter was about that very masquerade ball, he was furious, because that was how they lured Celestia. Roosevelt ran out of the room and shouted at his subjects to bring him a carriage. The subject tried to stop him, as an urgent notice had arrived from Duke Diggory, but Roosevelt insisted on his own. The envoy personally conveyed to the Duke that Mr. Roosevelt had arrived at his estate alone. Even though Roosevelt was a count, the king himself respected him. The people already saw Roosevelt as a hero. The Duke shouldn't have made him his enemy. When the Duke arrived, Roosevelt threw the paper on the table and said that he was waiting for an explanation. Although Duke and Celestia's father, but now she his wife, the Count nearly drew his blade, saying that his father had staged the scene for treason, and he began to doubt the nobility of House Royce. The Duke reassured him, saying that it was Celestia who had asked for advice because failures at first marriage nights. Roosevelt himself should have realized that Celestia was an empty woman, capable of cooling only a man's ardor. His daughter had already been divorced precisely because of problems in bed, and the Duke only wished with all his heart that things would turn out differently for her this time. Her father sent her there so that Celestia could be taught to be a normal woman. After all, she's as indifferent as a doll. Her coldness kills any desire in a man. The Count believed these words, thinking that Celestia was getting divorced because ordinary intimacy was not enough for her, and she left her husbands, one after another. Roosevelt decided to apologize to the Duke for his harsh reaction, but at the same time said that from now on, all matters between them were a matter only between the two of them, as spouses. The Count will not tolerate his father continuing to fill his wife's head with advice on how to conceive a child, and he demanded that Duke Moore not brave to her order. It is a fact that the Duke is the father, but now Celestia belonged to the Count. After these words, he decided take leave before leaving. The Duke didn't understand why Roosevelt was so protective of his daughter. It all seemed like an obsession. Apparently, Celestia's time was running out, but the Duke no longer cared about his daughter because he now has a new wife. The Mad Count of War. Having won brilliant victories in countless brutal battles, he paved his way to the title of Count, for which he received this nickname. Since then, his name inspires only primitive fear, so that's what the nickname they called Mr. Roosevelt yesterday meant. At first, Celestia thought she didn't need to read any more documents about the Count, but she couldn't understand why he started crying yesterday. The maid entered the main character's room and wanted to deliver a letter. The girl asked, "No returned whether more graph." Roosevelt dropped in on Celestia briefly that evening, but left almost immediately. Celestia realized when this happened and wanted to know what he looked like at that moment. The Count was extremely angry. He demanded that a carriage be brought immediately. He then stopped home again on his way back, but an urgent order came through, and the Count was sent to the war zone. Celestia tensed up. Roosevelt wouldn't be able to return for some time, and yesterday she had such an important chance to ask him about yesterday. Having taken the letter, the main character opened it. It contained a notice about the debut ball. The letter was an invitation to an evening where Celestia, as the Count's wife, was obliged to attend. At the very end of the letter, the girl saw something amazing. One of the nobles began to adopt her. The last battle was a success. The knights found a lot of treasure. The Count's subject decided to immediately report this to the customer. If they hand over all these valuables to the crown, the reward will be very generous from the customers. However, Commander Roosevelt had never been particularly interested in jewelry. But at that moment, the Count picked up a gem that was similar in color to Celestia's eyes. In aristocratic society, a ball is more than just entertainment. It is an integral part of the life of the noble class. Now, it is Celestia's duty to conduct herself appropriately. as befits a wife of the House of Tristan. Besides, this reception called the girl private interest. The event organizers came out and announced a new member of the family. The new legitimate son of the House of Addington was named Karth. Cart looked very happy. Celestia was jealous and wanted to have the same. If you look into adoption, it turns out there's nothing impossible. Previously, Celestia was fixated only on having a child herself. But after all, not necessarily be relatives, by blood. A few months later, the Count returned with his detachment back to the city, having won another brilliant victory. The subject decided to say goodbye to the Count here so that Roosevelt could spend more time with his wife. The Count dreamed that he could live as before his marriage, stay in the barracks. Everything would be much simpler. Roosevelt ordered the servants at the estate to keep an eye on Celestia and make sure no man appeared nearby. The reward received will be enough to allow you to indulge in anything for a long time to come. This time, the customers didn't even skimp on precious stones. Roosevelt didn't know much about gifts. On the way home, he wondered whether Celestia would be happy with a bouquet or new jewelry. During all this time, Celestia attended social receptions several times, but the Count's people never took their eyes off her. Upon returning home, the Count immediately presented Celestia with the precious stones as a gift. The main character asked to give her a little time, since the Count was leaving again tomorrow. This is especially important. Celestia suggested they talk at the table, since Roosevelt probably didn't even have time to eat in peace. Roosevelt didn't understand why the girl had changed so much. They were having breakfast together for the first time. Celestia revealed that at a recent reception, she witnessed something extremely curious. The girl put down the adoption papers, saying that in aristocratic society, many families resort to this. The Count stopped the girl and asked her not to clownish herself, asking if Celestia had imagined what it would be like to tolerate another stranger in the house. Celestia knew she was an outsider, but these words hurt her. Roosevelt was adamant and did not change his point of view. The girl begged for permission, for the Count was almost never at this estate. Tomorrow, he would be leaving again for the barracks. And from there, no doubt, the Count would head to the next battlefield. Roosevelt said it was his house, suggesting that Celestia had an illegitimate child. He wanted to know how old he was, and perhaps the main character was just waiting for the right moment to take him to her place. Celestia burst into tears. If this child really existed, she would be immensely happy. But returning to her senses, the main character hit the Count in the face for his cruel words. Suddenly, Celestia realized what she had done and immediately began to regret hitting her own husband. Celestia was burning with shame. The girl fell on her knees and began to beg Mr. Roosevelt for forgiveness. The main character began to worry so much that everything around her became dark and it became difficult for her to breathe. The Count said that the conversation was over for today and Celestia was forbidden to enter his room. A week later, Mr. Roosevelt left for the garrison that very day and never returned. Celestia still couldn't believe what she'd done. No matter how much anger clouded her vision, she shouldn't have resorted to violence. The girl thought she was destined to die alone. How to her deserve forgiveness, Count? The red-haired maid entered her mistress's room and apologized for disturbing her. The maid said that the master had asked her to give something to Celestia and said that she could do with it as she wished. The girl was about to leave, but noticed that the flowers had wilted. Although that wasn't her responsibility, when she tried to pick up the vase, it slipped from her hands and broke. The maid straightaway beginning apologize. Celestia realized that this was the maid who was about to have a baby, so she asked not to touch the vase. The main character said that she would order another maid to remove these fragments, but she wanted to know the maid's name. The girl's name was Alicia Badanter. Her family lives nearby on the outskirts of the premier. Celestia asked Alicia to listen carefully. As of today, the maid will no longer work here. The girl suddenly became frightened and wanted to know the reason, begging Celestia to change her mind. Because she would soon have a baby. Celestia gave her the gem. Even if she sells them for next to nothing, it should be enough for Alicia and her child to want for nothing for 10 years. The main character asked Alicia to think only about the child she was carrying under her heart. Her role as a mother is a truly great and noble mission. Celestia had only one request, to touch Alicia's belly. As soon as the protagonist touched it, the baby kicked. The main character was delighted to hear Alicia's vow that she would definitely raise and give birth to this healthy child. Celestia said that she could go with that, but she needed to hide the stones so that no one would see them. Alicia took her mistress's hand and promised her that she would return. As soon as she gave birth to this little one, Alicia would certainly return to repay her kindness. Soon Alicia boarded the carriage and departed. Celestia hoped the birth would go smoothly. There were also letters on Celestia's desk, including a regular invitation and a letter from the main character's father. The letter said that the father was getting married again and already had a child with this woman. They arranged lush wedding ceremony, therefore Duke applied official invitation. Celestia is obliged to ensure the presence of Count Roosevelt. The participation of such an influential man will add splendor to the celebration. This will be the protagonist's last duty to her family, after which Celestia will be free to live as she pleases. His new wife is younger than Celestia. They're said to have met at a previous reception. Moreover, she's already pregnant. They're rushing the wedding to get it done before the baby arrives. But the continuation of the family line should have become Celestia's only goal, hers purpose. But if the father himself acquires an heir, and if a boy is born, then at that very moment, Celestia will not be needed by her family. It no longer mattered who was born, because Duke Royce had renounced his daughter Celestia. It's quite natural. Who needs Celestia if after 5 marriages she couldn't give birth to a single child? Even Mr. Roosevelt is younger. Celestia has only heard about the child all her life. All her thoughts were about it. On the contrary, the main character should have been happy, since all her life she was obliged to live up to her father's expectations in order to finally get rid of this oppression. But now Celestia is free, both from her father's pressure and from her debt to the Royce family. It was precisely the end of this endless torture that Celestia dreamed of. But her heart continued to be sad, although all she wanted was to just hug her child and give him love. A month later, Mr. Roosevelt was in his office with his subject. He said that there would be a storm today. The subject suggested returning to the estate, as many soldiers had already gone home, worried about their families. Besides, Roosevelt's wife is probably seeing storms here for the first time, so she must be lonely and scared. Since the conversation about adoption arose, the couple had not even seen each other. Word servants, Celestia again locked herself in her room. The Count himself didn't want to return to the house. Celestia probably feels more at ease without Roosevelt around. The guy also understood that he himself had gone too far by accusing her of having an illegitimate child. For a noble lady, this is the gravest insult. No matter how serious it is, things that just it is forbidden pronounce aloud. The Count wanted to apologize to his wife. As he approached the estate, he saw lightning strike very close to the house. It looks like Roosevelt still did that decided return. In such weather, it is easy for thieves to get into houses. And as Roosevelt noted, one of the windows was open. The Count approached the window and suddenly realized that this was Celestia's room. Assuming that there was a robber or an uninvited guest there, the main character at this time went out onto the balcony and fell from it right in front of Roosevelt. The Count got scared and rushed forward. Fortunately, he managed to jump forward and grab Celestia. Having saved the girl, Roosevelt tried to bring her to her senses, but she was already unconscious. Celestia didn't hit her head. She was breathing and her heart was beating, but her body was frighteningly cold. As soon as the Count entered the building, he ordered a doctor to be called immediately to examine Celestia. Roosevelt ordered Celestia to be changed and went to her chambers. Although the maids tried to dissuade him, the Count disobeyed and walked to the door, kicking it open. As he walked, thoughts of who could be there swirled in his head. Once in the room, she was in a terrible state, and there was no one in it. The Count was angry. The maids behind him were shrouded in fear, awaiting Roosevelt's next steps. The most important thing for the Count was to find the evidence left in this room, but there were no traces of theft or signs of a struggle. They finished changing Lady Celestia's clothes, and the Count asked how long it had been since her room had been cleaned. When Roosevelt last entered this room, it was dusty, but not to this extent. The maids apologized. They justified themselves by saying that they forgot to clean the mistress's room. The Count shouted that only he and his wife lived in the house. How could they have forgotten about Celestia's room? Celestia never complained, and it was easier for the maids not to clean. Besides, it seemed like Mr. Myself her hates. Roosevelt told them to get out of his sight. He fired all the maids so they would leave as soon as the storm passed. The Count added that this house belonged to Celestia, and he did not need servants who were not capable of taking care of their mistress. The subject revealed that all this time, While the Count was away, Celestia never went down to the dining room. She frighteningly lost weight. When the Count found out that Celestia had eaten almost nothing all this time, he was extremely shocked. Roosevelt turned to the servants and asked when food had last been brought into this room, but the maids remained silent, and yet they told him that Celestia had last eaten 3 days ago. The Count could not believe that his wife had eaten 3 days ago and occasionally asked for food to be brought. Roosevelt kicked the ground, saying that while he was still in his right mind, the maids should leave immediately. The maids didn't want to leave because of the storm, but the Count said that if they didn't leave immediately, he would kill them. The maids, who are entrusted with the care of the mistress, must not only clean the room, but also serve food, monitor the health of the mistress, and promptly report everything, and also call a doctor. Celestia is the Duke's daughter, and the subject thought that if problems arise, she would express her complaints to him herself. The doctor revealed that there was no threat to life, only severe exhaustion and lack of sleep. The fall from the window could have been caused by simple dizziness. If Celestia is at rest, she should come to her senses tomorrow. Roosevelt was confident that he had provided Celestia with a decent life, but he did not give her a drop of happiness. Celestia was always like ice. Roosevelt didn't care whether she was a commoner or a noblewoman, a boy or a girl. He didn't need marital obligations. Back then, in his youth, it was pointless. The Count begged Celestia to call him by his name, which was always an empty sound for the girl. The main character wrote a will in her own name. As Celestia Tristan, she confirmed that she took her own life of her own free will. If Mr. Roosevelt decided to show even a drop of compassion, the most important thing was to attend her father's wedding. When there was a storm, Celestia wanted to jump. Surely no one would notice anything due to the weather conditions. Celestia hoped that in her next life, she would receive a body capable of giving life. This life was devoid of anyone's love. Celestia was tired of being alone. She couldn't find a reason to go on. Opening her eyes, the main character saw Count Roosevelt in front of her, and she realized that she could not escape. She failed and couldn't escape. God really hated her to the core, and she thought that everything was finally over. As soon as the Count noticed that his wife had woken up, he hugged her tightly, causing Celestia to be surprised. Roosevelt called upon his subjects to immediately call a doctor for Mrs. Celestia. When the doctor entered the room, he said that it was not worth moving the lady now, since she was still recovering. The Count said that he would wait in the drawing room, and now he would leave them for further inspection. Celestia still couldn't believe what had happened and felt the Count's touch on herself. As Celestia learned, she slept for 3 days. The master had not left her bedside the entire time. The Count did not leave the main character for a moment. He kept waiting for her to come to her senses. Doctor thought that they had strong love. Celestia burst into tears when she heard these words, because she didn't think it was possible to love her for anything. But the hug from the Count was so pleasant that in her mind, the main character begged him not to leave her. Lord Roosevelt fell asleep, at which time the doctor turned to him and woke the Count, saying that he had slept well, for it was already midnight. The doctor noted that Roosevelt finally relaxed when he felt safe. But Graf here, Same asked where Celestia. The room was so quiet, Celestia couldn't hear anything, and wondered why she survived. Lord Roosevelt did not enter her room. She could not understand whether the Count was really hugging her. A man with a crutch entered the room and asked if this was Lady Celestia Tristan. He was a psychiatrist. The doctor's name was William Laurent, and he was hired as Celestia's personal physician to live within the estate. William noted that Celestia had gone through a great trial, and whether she remembered what had happened during that period, the doctor told Celestia not to force herself to talk about it. Lord Roosevelt told him to maintain my lady's health. The doctor understood Celestia's surprise, so they would start with the main character telling about herself. William told my lady that she could consult him about anything that was troubling her. The main character decided to discuss something after all, asking the doctor if he had children. William realized that if the first consultation was about children, it must be important. Celestia was already 24 and had never had a child. William, he replied, like in spite of age, in this no problems. William's late wife gave birth to their son at 26 and gave birth safely to another at 28, and to top it all off, they were twins. But as Celestia already knew, pregnancy can only happen through interaction with a partner. The doctor wanted to know why Lord Roosevelt was so averse to intimacy. Celestia revealed that the man hated her and that this was the Count's way of abusing her. Everyone in this house existed to make Celestia suffer. Her room wasn't cleaned. The maids looked down on her. These days felt like a constant mockery. As long as Celestia remained the wife of Earl Roosevelt, she would never get the life she desired. William then decided to speak with Lord Roosevelt personally. If Lady Celestia wished, they could discuss how she could have a child. Celestia started crying. She couldn't believe that a person could be so calming. The main character's doctor spoke to Theodore and said that Dr. William is currently consulting with his wife. Before this, he also talked to the doctor. William wanted to leave the big hospital and move somewhere quieter. The doctor noted that William was good at his job, and besides that, he was quite popular among women. When William entered the room and said the consultation was over, Roosevelt stood directly before him with an enraged expression, faces. The psychologist did not understand why the Count's face had changed so much, because a day ago he had not been like this. A day ago, the Earl asked William to make sure that Celestia would not suffer anymore. Celestia's condition requires her to remain in bed, but William must also prescribe medication for her. And what about Celestia's personal preferences? Madame has a strong desire to conceive a child. In addition to maintaining her health to make conception easier, William will prescribe Lady Celestia the necessary vitamins. Roosevelt said it was useless. An intimate relationship between him and this woman was impossible. The Count asked not to worry about him. William's job was to maintain Celestia's health, and he would pay. But if William, for any reason, touches this woman, he cannot expect to leave this estate alive. Dr. William returned to his hospital and started a conversation with his assistant, telling him about his move. The young consultant noted that as an outside psychiatrist, William would have to visit Celestia frequently, but William was not worried about this. The consultant offered his help in the form of an assistant. He understood the circumstances with Lady Celestia perfectly well. When the main character saw her room, she was surprised because it was as clean as when she saw it for the first time. Roosevelt added that all useless maids were fired and new ones were brought in, but if they were also incompetent, they would also be replaced. Celestia was told that she could do as she wished in the estate, but she could not even imagine that she had the right to change servants so easily. Roosevelt said that Celestia should report the day of the storm as soon as she came to her senses, and he would kill the culprit. Celestia was surprised. The Count still did not understand that she jumped out of her own free will, but the girl could not find her suicide note. Lady Celestia feared Roosevelt's reaction to learning the truth about her suicide, but the main character decided to reveal the truth that there were no culprits, and it was entirely her fault. The Count told her to be more careful. Celestia realized once again that he had no interest in her. Roosevelt understood that she was very tired, so he turned to his subject and told him to make sure that such a thing never happened again. As to how the maids should address Celestia, they should inquire with the lady directly. The main character started searching, but she couldn't find her suicide note anywhere. As it turned out, Celestia's note ended up in the hands of a subject. William introduced his assistant to the Earl and Lady Celestia. The guy's name was Hayden Radcliffe. Hayden begged Dr. William to come and ask the Count for a job as an assistant. William noted that Hayden was quite young, but already capable of much. At first, the psychologist thought he was too young to work with the lady of the estate, but as it turned out, Hayden worked as Lady Celestia's chief psychologist at the hospital. During this period of time, Lady Celestia was with the Albright family. This was her second marriage. Hayden remembered well the state of Lady Celestia 3 years ago, and to help her now, the guy offered his services as William's assistant. The Count didn't have to worry about Hayden's interest in girls, as he had a beloved wife for whom he tried his best. Hayden also heard rumors about Lord Roosevelt, a distant acquaintance of his wife's, as a soldier who was a true national hero. The assistant asked to meet with Lady Celestia to prove whether he was worthy of the position or not. The main character quickly recognized the guy, and Hayden revealed that he was hired as an assistant to Dr. William. Previously, because of Celestia's ex-husband, he was the one who consulted with her on various matters. After divorcing her husband at the time, Celestia also left the hospital. But Hayden was a close friend. The Count was upset that while Celestia was talking to Hayden, she never paid any attention to Roosevelt. William told my lady it was time for today's temperature check. Hayden noticed a subject who looked agitated and had a letter in his hands. After Celestia's attempt to end her life, a servant found the very same letter in which he recognized the lady's handwriting. He did not want to give the letter to Roosevelt now because his emotional reaction might be too violent. Hayden said he could take care of the letter, and they would pretend they found it in the middle of the room. The assistant was not connected with this incident, but if it can be attributed to chance, the Count will believe it. The servant bowed and began to thank Hayden, saying that from now on he would be on the assistant's side. Hayden was delighted that he had such an opportunity to profit, to meet Celestia again, now as the wife of the war-obsessed Roosevelt. If the assistant does everything correctly, he will be able to get more money than from the Barron family. Soon Hayden came to the main character with flowers in order to please the desperate girl. Celestia thanked her assistant for doing his job and even going beyond it. The maids thought Dr. Hayden was incredible. He looked like a prince, and thanks to him, Celestia's expression became much happier. Count Roosevelt passed through at the time and listened to the maids praising Dr. Hayden. The Count was approaching a battle. In exactly a week he would go to the battlefield. So Roosevelt wanted to see Celestia's face once again. Hayden was surprised that the lady had been married 5 times, noting that he was still unfamiliar with high society. The guy noted that if Celestia had so many partners, it proved that she was a fascinating woman. The main character revealed that it was all because of her father and the Duke, and their power alone. Hayden took the girl's hands, convincing Celestia that the reason was simple. Celestia is an amazing woman. The assistant also added that he had heard about Celestia's efforts with Dr. William. In Hayden's eyes, Celestia was a barren puppet who had failed to conceive 4 times already. The assistant kissed my lady's hand, saying that for the good of his wife and future child, he would try for Lady Celestia. Celestia was pleased to hear such words. After all, once she got married, the lady no longer heard such words. At this time, Count Roosevelt watched from behind a crack in the door, his blood boiling with anger. Nothing had changed since 3 years ago. Celestia craved affection, so much so that she was delighted with flowers while her husband ignored her. Hayden wanted to know about Roosevelt. Celestia said he was a great man, much better than her, but as a husband, he was too cold. The assistant interrupted the girl and said that, in truth, his marriage was also not going well. It was a marriage purely for political reasons. His wife simply wanted a child with a man who could run the family hospital. That's right. Hayden thought he could understand Lady Celestia's painful feelings. Hayden said that if Celestia were to have a 6th marriage, the assistant would be fully dedicated to helping her. The main character thanked him. Count Roosevelt was still listening to their conversation and remained angry. Dr. Hayden said he appreciated the conversation, but it was time for him to go. The guy added to Lady Celestia that he would spare no effort regarding the child that the main character had desired for so long. When Hayden left, the Earl came in and told Celestia to never go near that man again. The protagonist tried to express her dissatisfaction. Roosevelt responded that he was a man offering obscenities to another man's wife. Celestia said it was just a joke. Dr. Hayden was just trying to be supportive. Roosevelt replied that Hayden's eyes were rotten, as was his character, and therefore he should not appear in this house again. Celestia's expression changed, and she asked him to take those words back, because Hayden was her friend. All these days, full of loneliness, the doctors were the only ones who kept Celestia company. The main character reminded the Count that she was allowed to do as she wished in this estate. Roosevelt hit the wall in anger, but he couldn't answer Lady Celestia. The next morning, Dr. Hayden came to Celestia with a new bouquet of flowers in his hands. As usual, he brought medicine from Dr. William, and he told him to continue with the prescribed medications. Hayden had 2 types of medicine in his bag, and he secretly switched one of them with the one prescribed for Lady Celestia. If, despite Dr. William's efforts, Celestia's health continues to deteriorate, then he will be fired. If Hayden becomes the chief psychiatrist, winning Lady Celestia will be much easier. Dr. William came to his appointment, saying that her examination results were worse than the previous ones. According to Celestia, she took the prescribed medications at the correct time and on schedule. Suddenly, the main character began to lose consciousness, which Dr. William could not have expected at all. Soon, Count Roosevelt also learned about this when one of the maids reported that his wife had lost consciousness. Hayden came immediately when he learned of Celestia's condition. Dr. William decided to prescribe new medications for the main character. New medications were specially selected for Milady's current condition. Hayden was sure that Dr. William could not notice the difference in the drug substitution. The assistant was happy because no one noticed the substitution, but he didn't expect Celestia to lose consciousness. Hayden wanted to take the medications back so he could use a lower dose next time. Suddenly, Count Roosevelt entered the room and asked his assistant what he had just done. Roosevelt assumed that Celestia had lost consciousness due to his actions, so he wanted to know. Hayden tried to say he wanted to see Celestia's medications. The Earl interrupted him and asked if he was trying to slip something to his wife. Hayden couldn't answer sensibly. The pressure that came from Count Roosevelt was terrifying. The man asked the assistant to show him his bag to make sure he wasn't carrying anything suspicious. This turned out to be bad for Hayden, as he still had the second medicine bottle in his bag. Hayden said he didn't want to show the letter now if possible, in relation to Lady Celestia at such a time, but he had to. An assistant recently found this letter that had fallen into a crack between the fittings. Considering circumstances, and he not found needed moment, the Count suggested that the reason for Celestia's poor health and the hiring of a new psychologist could be closely related to Hayden. The assistant wanted to leave, but Count Roosevelt stopped him, asking what he meant. Because the Count grabbed Hayden, his bag fell to the ground, and the flask was partially visible. Celestia woke up at this time and asked her husband to stop questioning the doctor. The main character noticed a note in Roosevelt's hands and realized that he had learned about her suicide attempt, but the Count said he had found the letter stuck between the furniture a short time ago. Roosevelt was about to read the letter, but Celestia begged him to stop and not open it. The Count became angry, and Celestia was forced to admit that it was a suicide note she had written the day before the jump. Roosevelt asked why she did such a stupid thing, because his wife told him that it was an accident. He wanted to know the real reason for such an act, whether it was really about intimacy, and Celestia thought that she could not live without something like that. The main character was hurt by these words, because all this time she just wanted a child. She finally thought she could forget about it and move on with her life thanks to the doctors. But for some reason, when Celestia had a partner around with whom she was supposed to have children, she felt so lonely. Celestia did everything she could to avoid being abandoned, but she was disowned again and again. Worst of all, he tried to destroy the little piece Celestia had worked so hard to achieve. The main character offered a bet. If she won, she would be allowed to spend nights with other men. This would be until Celestia gave birth to a child. Roosevelt didn't want that, but Celestia interrupted him and said that if the Count refused to be her partner, the girl didn't care who it would be. If Celestia loses, she will never try to die again and live as Roosevelt wishes. The Count wanted to know how they would decide the winner. Celestia replied that they would play chess. Roosevelt immediately remembered his childhood when he played chess with Solace, and she taught him. Dr. William turned to Celestia, saying that he was about to leave, but she could call at any time. Roosevelt set up a chessboard. They were to play a game to 3 points. Celestia asked why Roosevelt didn't ask her whether Celestia could play chess or not. As a child, the Count was surprised that Solace could play chess, and the girl wanted to teach him. Roosevelt said that he was a simple soldier from the village, so he did not know how to play chess. Suddenly, Celestia realized it. Chess is a gentlemanly pastime that only the nobility knew. Celestia wanted to change the rules of the debate, but Roosevelt said he knew how to play chess. Roosevelt told his wife that he learned to play chess from the advice of a close friend. The Count learned to play chess so well that he was able to defeat the second prince twice in a row. Suddenly, Roosevelt realized he had lost. Celestia had checkmated him in just a couple of moves. The main character returned the pieces to their original place and immediately began the second match with the pawn. Celestia remembered how she played chess with her ex-husband. He was angry at her because he thought that she was mocking him with her intelligence. The main character easily finished the second match, winning, again putting her in checkmate. It was the same in childhood. Solace easily defeated him. Roosevelt could not win even once. Roosevelt tensed up. If he lost to Celestia now, she would have the right to cheat on him with another man. The Count wondered if all those rumors about Celestia were true, if she wanted not just to cheat, but to have a child. Suddenly, in front of Roosevelt's face, the piece fell into place, creating another checkmate and securing Celestia's victory. The sun had already set. Celestia said that she was going to bed, asking the Count to call the maid. Roosevelt asked Celestia to stop. He wanted to know who Celestia wanted to invite to bed. The main character said that the doctor has beloved children and a wife, and Dr. Hayden is just a friend and nothing more. Romantic relationship with someone so young even, not were discussed. But even so, the two doctors were much more important and closer to Celestia than Roosevelt. The Count grabbed Celestia by the shoulder and said that in Celestia's part of the argument, Roosevelt could also be her partner. Left with no choice, Roosevelt had to undress in front of Celestia to fulfill her wish. Roosevelt said he could stop at any time if Celestia wanted. The Count waited for the girl to tell him to stop before his mental health reached its peak. The next morning, Celestia woke up alone in bed, assuming it had all been a dream. There was a note next to the bed. Lord Roosevelt was riding out to the battlefield, and the next time Celestia wanted sex, it should be with him. During the trial, Roosevelt made a strange expression on his face, causing Celestia to wonder about it. Roosevelt hated Celestia because she was involved in the burning of the Count's village. But she never lost control before it was nothing more than a process to conceive a child. It was painful, humiliating, and pathetic. This time it was different. Under Count Roosevelt, Celestia felt like she was melting. Dr. William came to Lady Celestia to check on her well-being this morning, but he did not expect to see my lady naked in bed. Many days later, Roosevelt fought, and this time he was terrifying in the heat of battle. The Count became so immersed in the battle that he almost single-handedly destroyed all the enemy forces. He felt strange. The feeling that remained from that night still enveloped Roosevelt. Roosevelt began to blame himself for allowing himself to lose control and tarnish Celestia. But when he experienced this with his wife, Roosevelt began to doubt the rumors that were spread about Lady Celestia and her preferences in intimacy. The Count began to think that during their night, Celestia might not have been truthful. If she wasn't satisfied yesterday, did Celestia make the same face with another man? The subject approached and said that the captive wanted to negotiate with the Count. When the night revealed the identity of the captive, who turned out to be Adrian, Roosevelt's face changed, and he immediately wanted to meet him. The captive was Celestia's ex-husband, Adrian. The Duke called him perfect for Celestia. Celestia's perfect match was the Duke of Chester, Hadrian, and now he's a prisoner. When the Duke saw the commander of this battle, Adrian admitted that this explained his loss. Adrian was the first to marry Celestia and was the root of these rumors about the Earl's wife. The Duke said that he had completely surrendered. He was only helping in the war because his wife's father asked him to accompany the military. Adrian was ready to tell any truth, and the Count immediately said that he wanted to know about Celestia. The Count was already angry and wanted to know only the truth and facts about Adrian's ex-wife. Dr. William approached Celestia to check on her well-being. Heroin became much better. Since Lord Roosevelt left for the front lines, Celestia was finally able to live in peace. Now that the maids had changed, Celestia's room was much cleaner and was kept that way. Lady Celestia was glad to see Dr. William. Her health was completely restored thanks to him. In truth, the main character's condition stabilized after she lost consciousness, but she more far from states to where child. Before Lord Roosevelt left for the front, Dr. William spoke to him. Count revealed that he saw how Hayden changed medicine. Celestia refused to listen to the Count, so he hoped for help from the doctor. William thought about it and realized that this might be true, because just before this, Milady's health had worsened. From that moment on, William decided to take full responsibility and deal with medicine himself. Moreover, from that moment on, Lady Celestia's health never took a turn for the worse. Dr. William noticed Celestia playing chess and winning crushing victories against the maids. The chessboard had been standing in the same place for a couple of days, and the maids were interested in it, so Celestia decided to teach them. William has noticed Celestia's talent in chess. Even he or Dr. Hayden don't stand a chance against my lady. The maid approached Celestia and wanted to know if it was true that my lady had defeated Lord Roosevelt at chess. The doctor revealed that Roosevelt was famous for being fake enough to defeat Prince Louis. Soon, Adrian told everything he knew. But the boy didn't understand why the Count was asking about this woman. The truth turned out to be the complete opposite of the rumors the Count had heard. In others and words, everything rumors about interests Celestia were lies. Adrian smirked and said she got what she deserved. Celestia felt like a doll, and it was quite off-putting. And yet, the Duke refused to admit his guilt. Captain Roosevelt lost his temper and decided to hit Adrian. Hayden talked to Celestia, and she told him that with all her ex-husbands, she couldn't be with them for long. Celestia apologized for what she said, but Hayden convinced her that he was glad to hear the truth. Hayden had been trying to get to this point for days. Celestia didn't have any weird tendencies, she was just frigid. Hayden was going to do what he wanted, as now was the perfect opportunity to act. The guy closed the doors to the chambers and asked Lady Celestia if she remembered his confession. The truth is that Hayden loved Lady Celestia, not as a patient, but as a woman. Hayden approached the main character and asked if it wouldn't be better to check if she could carry a child. Celestia was shocked, and Hayden wondered if he could be the one to satisfy Celestia's body and soul. The main character couldn't believe that Dr. Hayden was capable of such a thing because he had a wife and children. Celestia also wanted a child, and she won the chess game, so she had the right to change because she was running out of time. While Hayden was undressing, the main character remembered Count Roosevelt's words that next time she would spend the night with him. Milady Celestia stood up and apologized, telling Hayden that she couldn't do that to him. Hayden didn't expect such an answer, and in his emotions he took his things and began to leave the estate. Celestia didn't understand why she was thinking about Roosevelt at that moment, because Celestia thought that nothing would work out with him. Soon Celestia went to the social ball. She tried to get ready and come. The ladies around the main character congratulated Celestia on her marriage, but they said it with mockery. Moreover, Celestia was under pressure from her father's new wife. The main character said that she hoped for the Duke's happiness. The pressure, the hassle, the moment Celestia was freed from it, she had nothing left. Perhaps because of this, Celestia no longer cared who would say something, because words no longer reached the girl. Suddenly, the main character noticed that there was a chessboard on the table next to her. The girls next to Count Robert praised him for his excellent chess skills. Chess was originally a male activity, but that didn't mean women couldn't play. Robert added that, compared to women, men are superior in every aspect, both physically and intellectually. The people nearby realized that Robert had started his monologue again. He had dominated the last ball. Robert added that God gave women the opportunity to become worthy of conceiving a child. Lady Celestia wondered who she was if she couldn't conceive a child. Celestia decided to invite Robert to a game. The right response now would be to simply smile like a proper lady, for a woman should know her place. The main character had nothing to lose. If no one else intended, then Celestia wanted to be honored with a game of chess. The Duke apologized with a sneer, saying the game might be too much for a woman. Celestia didn't need the rules explained. She just wanted to play a fair game. The match lasted for quite a long time, and the spectators did not understand who had the winning side. Robert couldn't understand where Lady Celestia got her chess skills from. From the moment Celestia realized the game, she already knew how to win. But the main character didn't know how she learned chess. The main character played chess with her father and dreamed of playing as well as he could. But these memories were rather weak, and Celestia was unable to remember everything. While the main character was trying to remember the history of her chess skills, she put Robert in checkmate. Robert was broken and begged Lady Celestia to play another match, but the girl had another request. Celestia recalled the words about women being inferior in intelligence and asked Duke Robert to take those words back. When it comes to intelligence, gender does not matter. Especially for the nobility, they must not forget about respect for everyone. Robert understood Celestia's words, and she thanked him. But the Duke wanted to play one more match. The audience admired Celestia. They didn't think that Milady was such a kind person. Besides Robert, a whole line of nobles lined up in front of Celestia and began to persuade her to play another game. The nobility believed that Lord Robert might give in, but he immediately refuted these words. Robert never spared his opponents. One noblewoman mockingly remarked that Celestia had other hobbies besides nightlife. Robert recognized this girl. She was the daughter of Baron Bernard. The Duke would not tolerate such humiliation towards the man who defeated him. Duke Durant appeared and asked Lady Celestia to allow him to play chess with her. Durant was the organizer of the ball. He admitted that he was surprised to see a girl who likes to play chess. He was immensely pleased that Lady Celestia had accepted his invitations. He hadn't seen such a skilled person like Robert in a long time. The main character accepted this match with pleasure. The girl couldn't even imagine that everything would happen like this. At that time, Roosevelt was sitting by the fire. He was sad because he could not believe that all the rumors about Celestia were faked. The subject wanted to know how the Count felt because he had changed since the moment he beat Adrian. The guy suggested that the Count's appearance had changed because of what Celestia's ex-husband had said. He had heard about these rumors too. The guy understood how Roosevelt felt, because he too had heard rumors about Lady Celestia for quite a long time. Roosevelt didn't even try to look at Celestia. He saw nothing but the fake paintings created by her ex-husbands. The Count had to look at Celestia from a different perspective to save her from a terrible life. The main character is no longer the Celestia she used to be. The Count was looking for her, and the fragments of solace made him angry. And that day, he saw a beautiful girl. Roosevelt realized that he could never understand her. Back at home, Celestia began receiving many new invitations to play chess. Dr. William spoke to Milady, noting that she had been frequently active in social events lately. The main character received many invitations to chess games and enjoyed attending them. Apparently, Duke Robert introduced her to many new people, and Celestia enjoyed learning about everything. This time, the main character received an invitation to tea, but not for a game of chess. The doctor noted that chess had increased her social circle, and it would be good if there was someone there that Celestia already knew. When Celestia was already in the carriage, she hoped that everything would continue to go well. Socializing used to feel like nothing more than an obligation, but now Celestia enjoyed interacting with other people. But it was still ironic that Celestia was only able to do this when she had lost everything. Only Lord Roosevelt remained, but he promised, and Dr. Williams supported my lady. When Lady Celestia came to the tea party, people wanted to know whether Roosevelt attended the event and whether she was the lady from the rumors. Celestia was upset because she expected to be discussed in a bad light again. But everything turned out differently. People recognized her as the one who beat men in chess. Many important people lost to her. The nobles praised Celestia's me, adding that the whole city had been talking about her lately. Almost all the time, the main character heard bad rumors about herself. But thanks to Robert, society changed its opinion. The girl offered Celestia to talk alone if she didn't mind, and the main character was about to agree. But suddenly the main character noticed someone among the crowd. This person turned out to be Dr. Hayden. Celestia tried to avoid contact with him in every possible way, but Hayden personally approached her. The public was interested in Hayden's relationship. The girl revealed that he was the doctor who had previously treated her. Hayden revealed to the public that Milady was very warm to him, even though Hayden was not of high nobility. The doctor's words were so confusing that the nobility assumed that Celestia had cheated on him with such a young guy. Hayden added that Celestia invited him to tea alone, and when they became close, they had some very embarrassing stories. The main character interrupted Hayden and asked him to step aside to tell her about Dr. William. Once alone, Celestia wanted to know what Hayden was trying to do. After all, the doctor was trying to make it look like there was something between them. Hayden took Celestia's hand, saying that inviting him to a place where it was just the two of them would put her in an awkward position. If someone saw the situation Celestia was in, it wouldn't be a simple misunderstanding. The main character reminded the doctor that he has a loving wife and child. But Hayden, he replied, like this marriage fully political. Hayden was telling the truth about having a child with Celestia. He loved the main character so much and could give her everything she wanted. After all, he already has one child, whom Hayden called a successful experiment. Celestia punched Hayden in the face and told him not to call the kids that. Each of them, it's the man whom wished. As a person and a friend, Dr. Hayden helped Celestia, and she is grateful to him. But from that moment on, the main character despised him and no longer wanted to maintain any contact with him. Now Dr. Hayden no longer had the right to visit Lady Celestia's estate. When Lady Celestia returned, she was immediately greeted by the maids and Dr. William. The protagonist went to speak with Dr. William, revealing that she had forbidden Hayden from visiting the estate. She wanted Hayden to no longer have any say in her treatment. William never imagined Hayden was capable of such a thing. It all sounded as if his friendship with Lady Celestia was nothing more than a well-thought-out plan. The doctor apologized, saying that once he dealt with the consequences of Hayden's actions, he would immediately find a replacement. Celestia didn't try to blame William. She also thought that everything would be fine because Hayden was an assistant, and she should apologize to Lord Roosevelt for not believing his warnings. The good news for my lady was that Lord Roosevelt's carriage had arrived at the estate. The main character doubted whether she would be able to apologize well, since after the chess game, they had not communicated. As soon as Roosevelt entered the estate, he immediately wanted to know where Celestia was. Celestia decided to meet Mr. Roosevelt personally, so she greeted him. The main character thought that she had made a mistake that angered Roosevelt, so she decided to tell him everything first. Lord Roosevelt grabbed his wife by the shoulders and shouted at her, asking if all these rumors were lies. Celestia didn't understand why Roosevelt had only now decided to find out about her past marriages. The Count told the truth. He learned about the truth from the words of Celestia's first husband, Chester Adrian. Celestia didn't care about this man anymore, but now was not the time to mention Dr. Hayden. And for the first time in this marriage, Roosevelt actually asks her about the veracity of these rumors. Celestia had long since given up trying to make people believe her. She thought that even if she tried to tell the truth, no one would listen. But finally, the main character found a place filled with light, and Roosevelt tried to find out the real Celestia. Celestia decided to take a step forward and tell the truth. Perhaps this step would lead her to a greater light. The girl agreed to reveal the reality, on the condition that they talk in Roosevelt's room. If the Count truly wants to trust Celestia, he must accept Celestia for who she is. After closing the doors behind him, Roosevelt told the main character to tell the whole truth about these rumors. Celestia said the rumors started spreading shortly after she got divorced. These were the facts as they related to Chester. But Roosevelt wanted to know about other former. It couldn't be that the other husbands did nothing, since rumors can't last for so long without grounds. In fact, all 4 ex-husbands adjusted their stories to disgrace Celestia. As a result, everyone believed in the truth of these rumors, no matter how much Celestia tried to refute them. Count Roosevelt understood everything from the expression on his wife's face and asked her again if everyone was to blame for this. He wanted to know everything: who started these rumors, who continued them, and who made a puppet out of Celestia. Roosevelt did not understand why Celestia was not angry, as this is a disgrace for any woman. Celestia's father was a duke, and with such power, the girl could take revenge on her exes for their bad treatment. Roosevelt didn't understand why Celestia remained silent and simply allowed her exes to bully her for so long. Celestia smirked and asked if Roosevelt really thought that if she hadn't kept quiet, something would have changed. The main character didn't even understand when she lost hope, whether it was the moment when Chester's feelings faded, or even before that, when the Duke kept telling Celestia about the meaning of her life. Celestia never had anyone who wanted her for who she really was. Roosevelt took Celestia by the chin and told the girl not to decide such things alone. The Count wanted to know everything about his wife, what happened between Celestia and her ex-husbands, and whether Celestia's heart wavered. During her time with her husbands, how much Celestia let her hair down, how often she wore this perfume. Roosevelt wanted to know everything. Roosevelt wanted to know every fact that made her what she was today. Celestia didn't understand why she needed to go into such depth, but the Count insisted on finding out the truth. Roosevelt hated lies or politeness. Suddenly, he lifted Celestia, which even she didn't understand. The Count began to undress, assuming that this was what Celestia wanted if she came to him dressed like that. The main character is not the type of woman who will give reasons for attention without a reason. Roosevelt had already taken a bath and gotten ready, so he was ready for his wedding night with Celestia. Taking a lock of hair, the Count said that when they finished, Celestia would talk to him until the morning. The Count noted that if Celestia wanted to stop him, now was her only chance. The main character did not want to run away, no matter what Roosevelt's intentions were, and no matter how her heart beat. The feeling of their bodies touching each other made Celestia almost lose her mind. Soon Lady Celestia woke up, but it was already morning, and they still hadn't talked. Mr. Roosevelt asked the girl to stay put, adding that it was time to keep her promise and tell the truth. Dr. William was going to go to the main character and check her condition. One from Maids Wanted. Find out where disappeared Hayden. William said that Hayden's last day at the estate was a couple of days ago, and he said that William was enough on his own. The doctor doubted until the very end whether Dr. Hayden could have slipped something into the medicine. William knocked on the door because he didn't want to go to Celestia's after the last time. Lord Roosevelt left the chambers and told the doctor to return later. Celestia needed time to get dressed. The Count immediately left the estate and set off on his faithful horse. A couple of hours earlier, Celestia had fallen asleep again. All the talk about how she was a doll in bed turned out to be a lie. Roosevelt couldn't contain his anger. He was sure that Celestia was now his forever. The more he listened to these stories, the more anger built up inside the Count. It was clear that Celestia was afraid of her exes. But who could have made her like that? Roosevelt did not want to forgive these men. Everyone who dared to steal his light must pay for these actions. The Count tried to avoid Celestia's past, specifically because he didn't want to know about it. When Celestia left her chambers, Dr. William began his daily morning examination. A little later, the main character learned that Lord Roosevelt left the estate after their conversation. Celestia hoped that if she continued to spend her nights like this, she would one day be able to conceive a child. Dr. William looked at the papers and was shocked. He couldn't believe the numbers in front of his eyes. Count Roosevelt rushed to the right point. He found himself in front of a huge castle. This was the first time Roosevelt came to see him first. This person turned out to be the second prince, Louis Arnold. Louis thought he had come to invite him. Roosevelt said he had no ceremony. The Count came to find out the details and location of all the men who were her husband. Louis liked how straightforward the Count was, but he suggested they start with tea. The prince, already in memory, was investigation that they did. The prince overstepped his bounds and investigated Celestia for the Count. Roosevelt didn't want to see him then and threw the report on the table. But Louis had this information, and he told the Count everything, asking him if he was satisfied with the news. The Count was glad, but he wanted to know the addresses of these people so that he could visit them soon. Louis thought that the Count was asking this out of pure interest, but everything turned out differently. The nobility nicknamed Celestia the sterile puppet. She had 4 marriages, and Celestia was called that because she wanted to conceive a child. The Count wanted to know if Louis had heard about these rumors that husbands could not cope with the unusual tastes of the girl. Prince Louis believed that this name had another meaning. After all, Chester Adrian was the first to call Celestia a puppet. On the one hand, he spread rumors that Celestia had strange tastes, and on the other, Chester called her a puppet. Moreover, 3 ex-husbands followed the same principle. It is easy to assume that the reason was not Celestia's doll-like appearance, but something from a different point of view. Most likely, these rumors were faked, and what he grumbled to his friends was true. Louis wanted to know why the Count had that expression on his face. He had finally married the girl he had loved for years. When the prince first met Roosevelt, he was so deeply in love with the woman, making Louis wonder what would happen to the Count when he finally got her. The Count was grateful for the help, but he ended up hurting Celestia, just like the ex-husbands. The main character wanted a child, but she couldn't satisfy the man and was rejected 4 times. Roosevelt assumed that Celestia was addicted to sex, and that was why he was abandoning her, thinking that she could be changed. If anyone was a beast, it was Roosevelt. The Count was just a nuisance on her thorny path. Celestia had no reason to choose a common military man with low blood. The nobility probably thought that the Count would happily wag his tail in front of Celestia's title of nobility. Soon the Count was about to leave. He thanked the prince and apologized for such an abrupt arrival. Louis said the report only covered the period before Roosevelt's marriage, so he would find more information. The prince remarked that Roosevelt should have a thorough conversation with Celestia. It was true that the Count had put her on a pedestal, but wedding nights are also an important part of marriages. If the main character wanted a child, Count Roosevelt should have made this wish come true. Roosevelt said he had to do something before that, start a hunt for those who injured Celestia. The prince understood how the Count felt, but he didn't understand why he had to go so far. Roosevelt said that if Celestia was the kind of woman who was called a puppet, then the Count could not allow any man to live who pretended during intimacy. Louis wanted to know if Celestia was bad in bed, but the Count replied that it was the other way around. Did you like the recap? Want a continuation? Write Part 2 in the comments.